Tonight is the second half of a two-part project called One-to-One, which uses the idea of the ratio to talk about material versus physical space. The ratio is also used to talk about the dividing lines in a broader sense, to think about the way the constructed relationship between online and offline worlds creates or reinforces other types of divides. The premise is that to collapse a dichotomy by removing a barrier can be to actually reinforce it, and that a more effective, or at least more interesting way to think about the overlapping of dual spaces is to imagine them as a system of proportions, or a ratio, and then to ask whether the two sides have ever really been balanced. I like the ratio so much as a theoretical and visual device because of the colon, or the two dots between the numbers. Paradoxically, if you want to indicate that those two ones are exactly the same thing, you have to put something in between them. Those dots tell you at the same time that in order for the entities to be made entirely the same, they have to be made entirely separate. Not only do you have to be able to see the solid dots, but there has to be an empty space between them so that the two ones can see each other. If you imagine that you are a one on your own side of the equation, without that space of transparency between the opaque dots, you don't know what number is on the other side, or even if it's a number at all. That's why the question of ratios ultimately becomes one about vision. It's about visibility and access to information. The first half of this project's equation was a session here last month called opacity. It looks like a lot of you were actually here for that, but for everyone else, there's some documentation on this website. Opacity focused on embodied realities and tactics for obscuring yourself behind the separating divide. Opacity was about the dots. Transparency is about the space in between. The contemporary image-based corporate internet is an invisible architecture. It's a set of structures, infrastructures, measuring systems, and algorithms whose barometer of optimum functionality is their very invisibility. While front-end interface design wants us to forget these mechanisms altogether, forgetting that we're users rather than equal partners in an experience, businesses and governments promote transparency between us and back-end systems as a political tool. By creating the optical illusion or making the claim of a transparent system, we make its mechanisms even more opaque. The curator Michael Connor has written, "Are the negative effects of anonymity or invisibility, such as lack of privacy and lack of agency, counterbalanced by the possibility that the internet could make visible those politically invisible millions?" There are various ways to become invisible. One is to become transparent. Another is to put up an opaque shield. Neither tactic is realizable in the world we live in. These are just theoretical ideals. The practical question is whether or not we can selectively control the devices that control our visibility, or maybe it's whether we acknowledge that they're devices at all. A transparent divider establishes a one-to-one ratio between who or what is on either side of the glass, the seer and the seen. This balanced equation implies the supposition of an equal power relationship on either side, yet more often than not, the glass is mirrored. So the structure of tonight is that each of the participants will make a presentation on this topic, and then we'll have a group discussion and a Q&A. Each presentation is condensed to last no more than 10 minutes, hopefully, partially to keep things moving, but also because if you generalize things, this topic can get ridiculous and so easily leak out into the realm of empty rhetoric, which is, of course, the slippery problem of transparency as a subject in the first place. That's the reason it's such a useful political term. It allows you to conceal the stuff contained within or without a container, because you're denying that it's in there. One of the most important things to me when putting together this project as a whole is to keep each point of departure as specific and concrete as possible, and to think of the presentations as case studies or nodes of information or points of rupture, rather than a broad sheet coding a subject with terminology that's supposed to allow us to see it better, because the sheet itself is what we're talking about. To introduce everybody in the front row, first up is Benny Wagner. We are luckily in the middle of his current show here at Import, which is called Invisible Measure. By tracing the history of plexiglass, the show explores how transparency has historically been used as a vehicle for ideological social reform. Through videos and sculptures, it questions the shift in the meaning of transparency once it was made shatterproof, from its material use in modern architecture to its semantic deployment by humanitarian organizations like Transparency International. Benny is a German-Israeli-American artist living in Berlin. His multimedia practice focuses on the convergence of language, vision, and material. He's had solo exhibitions at Import, Future Gallery, Kleine Humboldt Gallery, and White Columns. He's participated in group shows at the Venice Biennale, at Tokyo Hongo Site, and LEAP, plus taken part in workshops with Harun Faroki and Hiat Helsinki. He's the recipient of the Saul Witt Award and the Nelson B. Delavan Award. Second will be Mona Mayhall and Asli Serbest, who make up Mauser Studio. Based in Stuttgart and Istanbul, they work with architecture, media, and design. Through their conceptual approach, they develop research methods to combine theory and practice in order to produce works beyond disciplines. Their magazine Junkjet serves as a platform for exchange and dialogue on the topics of architecture, design, and internet culture. Olia Lialina was born in Moscow. She finished Moscow State University as a journalist and film critic. She's a net artist and a pioneer of net.art. She is also an animated GIF model, and she writes about digital folklore, the vernacular web, and user culture, and is currently a professor at the Metz Academy in Stuttgart. Last will be Ben Vickers, who's a curator, writer, network analyst, technologist, and Luddite. He's currently curator of digital at Serpentine Gallery. He co-runs Lima Zulu Project Space, and he facilitates the development of Unmonastery, a new civically minded social space based on contemporary monastic principles, set to open in 2014. He makes a living and finds a vocation in understanding how systems of distribution, both human and other, come to affect our personal perceptions of reality. And now I will hand things off to Benny. Thank you again.